The America's Democrats podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to americasdemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. And if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Had enough of Fox News, the House Freedom Caucus, and Donald Trump? If you want the facts that you won't get from them or from the fake news sites of the alt-right, then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us.
This land is your land, and this land is my land, from the California to the New York Island.
Our first guest today is a truly great American, perhaps the leading progressive icon of our times, Pete Seeger. In honor of the centennial of the birth of Woody Guthrie, Pete has some fun telling stories on Woody and revealing the history of the anthem, This Land Is Your Land.
That endless skyway, saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me.
What are your thoughts about the man and his music?
He was an extraordinarily creative writer, thinker, humorist, and cartoonist. He kept a little notebook in his back pocket, and hardly not a day of his life passed without him writing down something in it. And now books are coming out with these things. He was he read widely, although he came from a small town in Oklahoma and had nothing but the local school education. There were teachers in those schools who realized what a remarkable young man they had. And in both the primary school and the high school, there were teachers who took him under their wing and just kept feeding him books. When he met me, we'd only been working together, or I was tagging along after him, rather, for a few months. I visited a friend who had a copy of the French writer Rabelais, and Woody was curious, picked it up, and said, "Can I borrow this?" And during the next 2 or 3 days, he read right through his translation of the French writer. And during the next few weeks, I could see him borrowing some of Rabelais' writing habits, like piling on adjective after adjective after adjective. Woody and I both considered ourselves communists in those days, not in the tight sense of we would take an assignment and infiltrate some organization with an assumed name, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I was, whereas some people used to sing up in the mountains north of New York City, what they call the Jewish Alps, and we had, the Borscht Circuit, that's what they called it, the Borscht Circuit, and we had what we call the subway circuit, I guess, but we'd go up to Bronx or some other place and sing for a house party. One of the main ways that communists raise money was for people to invite people to their house and charge them a few dollars and end up giving $50 or $100 to the party. it seemed to us a very democratic kind of organization. However, later on, when Stalin had a series of people who'd confessed to some crime, and they were executed. There was a whole string of people, and these were obviously tortured confessions. And a few years later, Khrushchev, 1956, said, Comrade Stalin was a very strong leader and helped us win the war against Hitler, but he was also very cruel. And he sent people away to Siberia without giving them any chance to defend themselves. Not thousands, not tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but millions. There was an absolute dead silence. This speech was made to 5,000 members of the Communist Party that got together every 5 years to see what's the new line they were supposed to parrot. And somebody shouted, "Why didn't you speak up?" And now Khrushchev's entire demeanor changed. Instead of being a rather normal tone of voice, he now shouted, "Who said that?" And now there was dead silence. And Khrushchev said in a normal voice again, "Now you see why I did not speak up."
Tell us a little bit, if you would, Pete, about when...
After Khrushchev, let me tell you, after Khrushchev's speech, communist parties all over the world just dropped to 10% of their former membership. There had been about 100,000 members of the Communist Party here, and after that speech, there were about 10,000.
How about that? Tell us a little bit about when Woody was committed to a hospital after he was diagnosed with Huntington's disease.
Well, he was allowed to come home on weekends the first year or so, if they thought he wasn't going to have a dizzy spell and do crazy things. Mm-hmm. And once when he came home, little Arlo Guthrie was 7 years old, and he said, "Arlo, they're singing my song, 'This Land Is Your Land,' but they didn't put in the record all the verses." And he made Arlo write down, little Arlo at age 7, wrote down the left-wing type verses in one bright sunny morning by the shadow of the steeple, by the relief office, I saw my people. As they stood there hungry, I stood there whistling. This land was made for you and me. And then right after that, these two verses, incidentally, I sang at Obama's inauguration. Mm-hmm. The next verse says, "Was a great high wall there that tried to stop me. Was a great big sign there said private property. But on the other side, it didn't say nothing. That side was made for you and me."
Let me ask you, Pete, if Woody Guthrie were alive today at 100 years of age, do you think he'd be optimistic about America, pessimistic, or just plain disappointed?
He'd be cracking jokes all the time, I think. Yes, I'm sure he would.
Would you say there are any current, or are there any current American musicians besides yourself who are following in Woody Guthrie's tradition?
Oh, there's not dozens, there's hundreds, because there's people reading Woody's songs in books and listening to them on records and say, I want to do something like you might say Bob Dylan was one of them.
Sure.
And no two are alike, but they did learn from Woody, right?
Oh, yeah.
And don't be afraid. Oh, here's the kind of thing Woody would say. He to a batch of other songwriters, they were all trying to write funny verses for some election campaign. And Woody said, why are you guys scared to be serious? It was quite a challenge. Why are you guys scared to be serious?
Do you find it ironic that many of his songs, notably This Land Is Your Land are so popular with all Americans, including people who actually hate his politics?
Let me tell you how that song got to be well known. He wrote it when he was traveling from California to New York at the invitation of Will Geer. He said, Woody, if you can get here by March, we've got the theater producers to let us use the theater for a midnight benefit concert, and a lot of people will hear you and you'll get some jobs. And he had to hitchhike. He may have run out of money. He was hitchhiking from Pittsburgh to New York in February, and you can bet his thumb was cold as he stuck it out into the February winds, and the cars going zoo, zoo past him. And he'd go in for a cup of coffee, which cost a nickel in those days, and God Bless America was on all the jukeboxes then. So God Bless America was the way he wrote the song. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to New York Island. God blessed America for me. And as I was walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley. God blessed America for me. That was the first verse. That was the first. I'm sorry, I keep remembering. I'm not remembering it right, so later on I remember. But what I just gave you, that was the first verse of the song. I don't think he had a chorus to the song. He had about 8 verses. Another one of the verses, nobody, oh no. He had the 2 verses I gave you, which they didn't put in the school song. Well, anyway, in the record came out for a tiny little record company called Folkways. And some teachers in New York found the kids liked the song, but they didn't put these 2 verses in it that I told you about. This great big sign there that said private property and all. Those 2 verses were not, and the reason is they were 78 RPM records was still the thing, and Little Folkways was still making records by 78 RPM size, and they said, there's not room on the record, so we have to drop some verses, and it's possible the head of Folkways says, maybe those verses will keep the song from getting sung in schools. All we know is that some New York City school teachers found kids loved the song. And a man from a great big publishing company called Silver Burdett, and they, I think they still do, publish songbooks by the million to sell to American public schools. And I spoke with a man from Silver Burdett. He said, I was in New York and found that kids in New York like the song. Maybe I said, maybe kids around the rest of the country will. So he put that song in the book without those 2 left-wing verses. He didn't even know about the 2 left-wing verses. He just put it as the song was in the 78 RPM record. Well, 20 years later, that song had never been played on the radio. It had never been sold in a single music store, but everybody in America knew it.
Absolutely.
Why? Because the kids took the song home with them. And they were singing it when they got home. Isn't that a great story?
That's fantastic. Let me ask you, you've won so many honors and met so many giants of history, politics, the arts. What would you say honors and personalities stand out the most for you?
Well, I've had some really wonderful honors. The Kennedy Center, way back years ago, and not quite recently from the AFL-CIO for the Union songs I used to sing. I still do. I was there when Woody wrote the song, You Can't Scare Me, I'm sticking to the Union. And on paper, who wouldn't realize what a great song it is? But the rhythm he had by those sticking to the, it sings great. I was there in Oklahoma City when the wife of the organizer of a union meeting said, Woody, all these union songs are about men and brothers this and brothers that. Couldn't you make up a song for the union women? And the next morning in the union office, he was at a typewriter, and he'd make up a verse and then stand up and sing it and sit down, write another verse. And a year later, I was making an album of union songs with some friends, and one of the songs didn't turn out so well, and they said, Pete, you got any idea for another union song we can sing instead of that one? And I said, well, he made up a great chorus, but I can't remember any but two of the verses. so we sang the two verses I could remember, and another man went into the next room and made up a third verse, which was not a very good verse. You gals who want to be free, take a little tip from me. Get to a man who's a union man and join the ladies' auxiliary. And women since then have made up many better third verses. In fact, I think there's Faith Petrick, the head of the San Francisco Folk Music Club. She usually sings about 6 third verses, all made up by women. The one I sing is, you women who want to be free, take a little tip from me. Break out of that mold we all been sold. You got a fighting history. The fight for women's rights with workers must unite. Like Mother Jones, move them bones to the front of every fight.
I'm sure that one gets an applause from women.
Now, my family is about to have lunch, and they say, why are you talking on the phone so long, right?
Well, I tell you what, we're not going to keep you from your lunch, Pete. We really appreciate your time with us today. We wish you the best, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
Let me tell you one joke.
No!
One more joke.
No! No!
I got to tell them one joke.
No!
It's one of Woody's best. He was put in a mental hospital with Huntington's disease, and 2 friends came to visit him. They said, Woody, how are they treating you? Is the food okay? And Woody said, yeah, the food's fine. They're treating me okay. Besides, this is the freest place in America. And his friend said, what do you mean? There's bars on the window. He says, here I can jump up on a table and shout, I'm a communist. And they just say, oh, he's crazy. You try doing that anywhere in America, see what happens to you. In my own book, I say, would Woody be a communist now? I say, read his books and his songs, and you make up your own mind. I'm sure you'd say, no, he would not.
Well, thank you very much for your time. You better get back to lunch before the women in your own house turn on you.
Exactly.
All right.
Okay, fine.
Thanks again. Take care.
Then I was strolling, the wheat fields waving, the dust clouds rolling, the voice coming chanting, and the fog was lifting. This land was made for you and me.
We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
Donald Trump's criminal attempt to steal the 2020 election failed. But it's not the only recent coup attack on our democracy. In the last few years, a cabal of right-wing zealots have plotted to seize control of the U.S. Supreme Court. By hook and crook, they've installed a 6-judge majority, and now they're using them as a political cudgel to try stealing not just a constitutional right, but an inherent human right from American women, the right to make their own reproductive decisions. By judicial fiat, the right-wing judges have decreed that the state will make birth decisions regardless of what mothers want. This is the Republican Party's current concept of small government. When the Supremes issued their government decree in June, headlines blared that the decision by, quote, conservatives on the court, quote, ends a woman's right to choose. That's wrong on two counts. First, there is nothing conservative about what amounts to a naked power grab by a small minority of pious ideological tyrants. Second, a human right cannot be ended. The judicial authoritarians who are perverting the court's purpose from justice to autocracy are deluding themselves if they think that 6 unelected judges ensconced in a marble bubble in Washington can deter the democratic imperative, much less the maternal authority, of millions of American women. Reality has many ways to conquer ideology. To be blunt, the right wing lost this fight the moment it won the ruling. Unfortunately, even the Biden White House doesn't get the depth of the public's outrage and determination to restore this right into law. Asked about rising anger at his inaction, Biden dismissed the critics. "I'm the only president they got," he snapped. This is Jim Hightower saying Joe might want to reflect on the vibrant history of American democracy. If leaders don't lead, the people will, even if that means getting a new president. Howdy-ho, folks. Thanks for tuning in and sharing my weekly commentaries. Also, please join me for a live web show I host every other Tuesday, the Hightower Lowdown Happy Hour at the Chat and Chew Cafe. You can join the action live online as I chat with grassroots leaders and progressive sparklies from around the country. Go to hightowerlowdown.org/chat-and-chew to find out about upcoming guests and watch past episodes. That's hightowerlowdown.org/chat-and-chew.
This Social Security measure, I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, "Welcome." It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly webcast for stand-up Democrats. And joining us now, Fred Harris, professor of political science at the University of New Mexico, well remembered among Democrats as a senator from his native Oklahoma from 1964 through 1973, and a candidate for the party's nomination for president back in 1976. Senator Harris, thanks for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Yes, sure.
This is the 100th anniversary of the birth. This year is the 100th anniversary of the birth of Woody Guthrie, the great writer and singer of folk music. You're a native of Oklahoma and represented the state in the United States Senate, as I mentioned. What are your thoughts about the man and his music?
Well, of course, he's one of my great heroes. And I used to, when I was campaigning for president, I used to say my theme song is that great anthem written by my fellow Oklahoman, Woody Guthrie, "This land is your land." And when I first met many years ago, the legendary folk singer and social activist Pete Seeger, he asked me right off, he said, "Do you know where Okemah, Oklahoma is?" I said, "Yes, it's the birthplace of Woody Guthrie." And he said, "Well, you're the first Oklahoman I've run into who knew that." And he pointed out, of course, that there have been people in Oklahoma who didn't like Woody's kind of left-wing views and didn't want to honor him. I went with Arlo Guthrie, who later campaigned for me for president, and Woody Guthrie's widow to Okemah, Oklahoma, where we made we had a little ceremony with marking the birthplace, a little small wooden shack, sort of, and not very impressive, where Woody was born in Okemah. And while we were there, though, the local banker who was with the Chamber of Commerce, I think, in Okemah, attacked us for trying to celebrate the life of Woody Guthrie. He said Woody Guthrie was a communist, incidentally, I later became close friends with Will Geer, who was grandpa on the Walton's television program. And he used to go with Woody free of charge and give concerts in refugee camps, Okie camps, and so forth in California. And so I asked him about that. I said, "What about this? People say Woody was a communist." He said Woody would not accept the kind of discipline you'd have to take. He wouldn't take anybody's orders in order to be a communist. He was not a communist. Woody was a real American, an enormously talented one, and I'm so pleased that George Kaiser in Tulsa now has bought a big part of his papers and so forth, and is opening a Woody Guthrie museum in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's a great thing, I think.
Yeah, that's something that seems to have taken much too long to happen to finally get the recognition in his home state. Would you say?
That's absolutely. It's right. It's the right time. They've done two things here lately in Oklahoma that are really good. One was the recognition of Woody Guthrie and the opening or the starting of the Woody Guthrie Museum. The other is they've just elected to the Oklahoma Hall of Fame Elizabeth Warren, who is a Democratic candidate for senator in Massachusetts. She's a former Oklahoman, and that I think is another great step.
And had the Sooners gotten to the national championship, well, gosh, everything would have been perfect in Oklahoma, huh? How did the Dust Bowl affect Oklahoma's political and social culture? Are there lessons from that agricultural and economic disaster that remain applicable today?
Yes, I'd say two things. One, at the time of statehood in Oklahoma, which was 1907, probably if you had a good poll, you'd find that ranked number one were the populists, number two probably were the socialists, three were the Democrats, and four were the Republicans. As you know, things have changed like crazy since then, and one reason is what's happened with the farming. The Dust Bowl, of course, was a steering experience, and it seemed like miseries come in pairs or even multitudes, and that's what happened with the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma. People have asked me, what's happened to Oklahoma? How come it's become so conservative? For example, President Obama did not carry even one of the 77 counties in Oklahoma. And one answer is what's happened to family farming. The other, for example, when I was first getting into statewide politics in Oklahoma, the Farmers Union was very strong, and for example, it was quite progressive. It was for graduated land tax, and it was for very strong liberal programs. But the Farmers Union more or less disappeared as a political force in Oklahoma as the family farm disappeared or declined drastically. There was a decline of organized labor as well in Oklahoma in recent years, and the rise of big oil and of evangelical Christians' activism and the metropolitan press. And so Oklahoma, even that was beginning when I was first elected to the Senate in 1964. Oklahoma has become increasingly conservative in its politics.
And in fact has voted Republican for president since '68. Did it start with the Dust Bowl migration to California, you think? I mean, was it just kind of a slow buildup from that?
I don't think that it's that you can tie that together exactly. Of course, my wife very often says, people ask her what happened to Oklahoma, and she says good people like Fred Harris left. I don't agree with that, but a lot of good people were forced out, of course, with the Dust Bowl, Okies going out west. But I think there are other factors that were much more important than just the Dust Bowl and the Depression. As I said, the rise of big oil, the decline of labor unions, the rise of the activism of evangelical Christians, the Metropolitan Press, quite conservative. All of those things have conspired to make Oklahoma's voting much more conservative. I think there's still a very strong strain of populism in Oklahoma. I don't doubt it. I go in and out of there quite a bit. But another thing that's been a big problem is this. Up until Howard Dean became the national chairman of the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party nationally had begun to totally ignore states like Oklahoma. And no campaigns were run there. For example, in any presidential campaign until Dean became chairman, if you were here in Oklahoma, for example, here in New Mexico, you'd find that there's all sorts of political activity by the Democratic Party and their candidates, and television advertisements and so forth. And if you went just across the line into Oklahoma, you wouldn't even know there was a Democratic campaign going on. They just totally ignored the state. And so it got to the place, and it's very much like that now, that you go down to coffee shop talking, people are just sort of embarrassed to speak up if they're Democrats. And it's become, again, not really socially acceptable in so many places to call yourself a Democrat. I hope we're reversing that now, and the Democrats in Oklahoma are real Democrats. They're progressive Democrats, and so are the leaders of the Democratic Party there now. So maybe things are beginning to change.
We're speaking with Fred Harris, professor of political science at the University of New Mexico, former Democratic senator from the state of Oklahoma. When you were in the Senate and running for president in 1976, you characterized yourself as a new populist. What does that mean in today's era when politics is so polarized?
Well, these Tea Party people, some people try to call them a populist, and there were people who called George Wallace a populist. No, that's certainly not true historically, and it's not true presently. A real populist today is, for example, Jim Hightower of Texas, who was my campaign manager when I ran for president. And what we said and what I said back then as a candidate for president, and what I've written about and still do, is populism is against concentrated economic power and concentrated wealth and income. And is in favor, like the Occupy Wall Street movement, in favor of a fairer distribution of wealth and income and power. And that's what populism means. And the means of achieving a fair distribution of wealth and income and power are really quite traditional things. That is a progressive income tax, and ours has certainly gotten out of whack, and programs that particularly benefit the middle class. This is important, doing something about that, rectifying that terrible maldistribution of wealth and income which exists in the United States today, as bad as places like Mexico, for example. Doing something about that, remedying that situation, requires action that will rebuild a middle class. And that's important not just for fairness, but it's really difficult, I think, to have a true democracy without a strong middle class. And ours has been under great pressure in recent times.
Fred Harris, professor of political science at the University of New Mexico, of course, Senate Democrat from his native Oklahoma from 64 to 73, a candidate for the party's nomination for president in 1976. Senator Harris, as always, we appreciate your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org and hope we can talk to you again soon. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
Well, I mean, the impact is that we basically just told 50% of the population of the United States that they no longer have control over their bodies, their decisions, that the government gets to make decisions for them that are very private, that they're going to have to live with for a long time. This decision is going to end up harming women. It's going to end up killing women. It's going to end up putting in jail doctors and nurses that are just trying to help women.
And what does this mean for Arizona particularly?
Well, Arizona right now, we know that all the Planned Parenthood and other kind of abortion clinics have stopped doing services, trying to figure out what they legally can and can't do. The legislative session just ended, so 90 days from now, an abortion ban after 15 weeks with no exception for rape or incest will go into effect, which will essentially, force women to give birth, without their volition.
And no doubt the governor would sign it, right?
He's already has signed it. As a matter of fact, he signed it and then was bragging about how his state is the toughest against choice.
I noticed on your website, Congressman, you said that you not only opposed this decision, disagreed with it, but that you would do whatever in your power as a member of Congress to make the effect of the decision null and void, or to help toward that. What do you what can Congress do? What can the president do? Is there anything they can do other than, getting more votes on the Supreme Court?
Well, look, I do think we have an opportunity to, again, we have the votes. We need to take the votes and we need to break the filibuster. Why are we using, again, an anachronistic rule of the Senate that's not even in the Constitution of the United States, that's been traditionally used to uphold Jim Crow laws, to turn around and deny women their opportunity for safe and legal abortions? It's not, and it's a hard time right now for us to really communicate to women when we say we're here with you, but we're really not doing anything we can legally to make sure they have access to safe and legal abortion. I also think that we have to look at where else can we give women the opportunity to have safe and legal abortions, even in the red states. Like, can we team up on federal property? We know that, at least from a lot of what we've seen so far from the courts, that they do understand that there's a separation between federal property and state property. And why couldn't we have some clinics on some of this federal property? We also need to make sure that women have the opportunity to travel out of state to get abortion services, and also that we should look at making sure that we have the ability to send people pills, aborted pills that would help them have safe and legal abortions over the mail.
Do you believe that this particularly, and we'll talk about guns in just a second, but particularly this abortion decision will motivate women, motivate independents, motivate particularly suburban women to vote in the midterms?
Well, I think it will, but you have to make the argument that we're actually going to do something about it. And I think we have to be careful with how we talk about it right now, because if we say elect us to protect Roe v. Wade, but we're not willing to break the filibuster, we're going to end up being caught not in a lie, but I would say people are going to say that we're purposely using this as a political tool when we're not actually fixing said problem. And so I think when we have to say, please elect more Democrats so we can overcome a filibuster, I think is what we should be really being realistic about. And I think it's also incumbent upon the leadership of the party to say that is our goal. To have this nebulous saying that, well, if you elect us, things will get better, but then it doesn't happen. You're actually only creating more apathy out there among voters. And it's not just, by the way, suburban women that we should be targeting. These are young urban women that tend not to vote in mid-year elections that are going to be the most energized and most affected by this. But again, they're a very smart voting group. And if we don't talk about this correctly, you're just going to feel like this is just another political tool.
Right. You mentioned the filibuster. Of course, one of the two senators in the Democrats in the Senate that has stood in the way of amending or ending the filibuster is your own senator from Arizona. Is she getting any pressure from Democrats in Arizona to change her opinion?
I don't believe she is at this point. I think things will start shifting in that direction. But at this point, I feel her and Senator Manchin are kind of flying under the radar, where they're both saying they support Roe v. Wade. They'll do anything to try to help women. But the one thing they have real power to do right now is to break the filibuster and pass current Roe v. Wade protections. So they should really, follow what they're saying and actually do something about it.
So, Congressman, in another big recent Supreme Court decision, this one, a New York State case regarding guns, the Supreme Court basically ruled that states don't have the right to pass any regulations on the carrying of concealed weapons. Now, what do you think is the impact of that decision?
Well, I think, again, this is a Supreme Court that is appointed by by presidents that have won their offices by a minority of voters or by machinations such as holding up Merrick Garland's election that are really, the goal is to turn the clock back when it comes to the kind of progressive movement of the country that was moving more and more towards sane gun regulations, gun safety regulations, or even when it comes to issues of choice or voting rights. And so this Supreme Court is not there to really uphold individual rights. It's really there to uphold really conservative Republican values that they can't win at the ballot box, so they're going to just legislate it from the judge's bench.
Yeah. In fact, Senator Warren was quoted this weekend as saying that the Supreme Court has lost all legitimacy. Do you agree?
I think at this point, the way that they're heading is that, they're losing legitimacy. I think we have an opportunity to figure out where they really are by passing, legislation that really will, I think, challenge where they are. So we know that they believe that every state has a right to decide about choice. But what happens when we pass a federal Roe v. Wade standard across the country? What's the Supreme Court going to do? Same with real gun reform, gun safety legislation. If you see the Supreme Court coming and weighing in there, I think that's when we could definitely say that they've lost legitimacy.
Right. Certainly, you can no longer. It seems you can no longer say that the Supreme Court is above politics.
No, absolutely not. Well, if you look at what they've been trying to do with like the I think it's called the docket, the shadow docket, where they're purposely pulling up legislation or purposely pulling up cases that really have not gone through the full process through the courts to effectively rule from the bench without actually going through a public hearing. It tells you a lot about where they're going and what their goal is.
They're looking for the cases that advance the GOP or the Trump agenda,
right? Or their agenda, whatever the agenda it is.
If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.